Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Geo Trip. Today I have my lovely co-host, Liaika, welcome with me. Hi, Liaika.
Hi, Dr. Prince. How
And
are
we're
you?
I'm well. It's good to be back. It's been way too long.
It has been way too long, but I think rest is super important and rest was needed. We've both had a really busy 2022 and beginning of 2023, no?
Yeah, for real. And seems to be just getting busier by the day.
It definitely is, but excited that we're taking it back to basics. We're starting a new season. I mean, I don't even know where I'd be without you. You literally just pointed out, well, not just, I actually just finally logged into my Twitter, but you pointed out that we're on year 2 of this. I cannot believe it.
We're in a terrible two phase.
You know what they say, right?
No.
If the toddler survives year 2, then you're set. Like or is it the parent? I mean, I have no idea. Help me out here.
It's probably the parent. It's probably the parent.
Yeah, I guess I'd hope the toddler survive.
We'd have bigger problems.
Please, audience, no toddlers were harmed in the taping of this episode.
Not at all. So we have a topic today that turned out to be kind of a hot topic a year or two ago, but I saw a picture on Facebook. Yeah, I'm one of the old people that's still on Facebook.
I think it's not on Facebook?
I know. I always go there and I'm like, why am I still here? But it's for the aunties, for my aunties. But there was this picture that my old advisor posted from out in West Texas. And he was out there camping, having a great time. And it made me feel weirdly nostalgic for field work. I love me a good field trip. So that's what we're going to talk about today, or field experiences in geology. Sounds good, right?
Man, yeah. Like I said, taking it back to basics, or I guess where it all started, fieldwork, or it's continuing for some of us.
So for me, right, I always liked being outdoors. That's kind of why I got interested in the geosciences, because as it was pitched to me, you could spend time outdoors instead of being trapped behind a desk. So I was with it. But then, I actually started my geology degree. And yeah, it was as advertised, lots of time outdoors. But what I kind of wasn't prepared for was camping for an extended period. So, the news that I would have to spend 2 weeks camping as a geology major was a bit surprising to me. And it took me by surprise. Yeah, I was kind of in disbelief, for real. So after I spent all this money on books and all this money on fees, I have to spend more money to go camping. Were you prepared for that coming in?
Wow. I mean, you're taking me way back. Short answer, no, I wasn't. Long answer, kind of one, but I never saw myself, or I foolishly thought I could circumvent it. And that also kind of goes back to, I guess, my geo story, or how I actually got really interested in geology. And so I have to admit, even though I enjoy being in the field, I appreciate field work. Ask anybody who road trips with me. I love stopping to look at random formations, and not trespassing, but collecting samples when I can. Even though I love all those things, I'm not a huge fan of being out in the field.
Yeah.
And so, again, it goes back to a little bit about my geo story, how I got involved, and then also just personal accessibility issues. So, yeah, this is going to be a great little chit chat today, huh?
I guess just off the top, right? Fieldwork is an important part of the geosciences, specifically geology. For a lot of people, it's critical, but there's a bit of dissonance there because there are many career paths that you can take in the geosciences where you're not going to be out in the field a whole lot. There's lots of lab work. There's lots of ArcGIS, like working behind a computer or a workstation. But I don't know, it's kind of like this romantic idea, right? That all geologists spend time out in the field, bonding by the campfire after a long day of hiking. And it's like almost this sacred rite of passage that everyone has to take part in. And I think that's being challenged a bit more now. But certainly when I was a student, yeah, you were expected to be out there and be out there. Out there I was.
Yeah, so even when I was a student, I mean, I guess to some degree I'm still a student or I guess a researcher, right? It's still expected you're still expected to be out there. And there are many coins or nuances to what makes a geologist a geologist. And so I think what I'm really going to like about this chat today is because we're going to kind of just talk about what fieldwork means to both of us individually, the importance of fieldwork, but the fact that there are also alternatives for accessibility. And so when I first started my undergrad, I remember having a professor who's now actually passed on, but the first thing he came into class and said was, "Who sees the most rocks wins." And, I took that to heart. And so it started to prep me for being out there. But I was always out there because I became a geoscientist because of actually my history in Trinidad. That's what really propelled me to figure out how I could do this as a career, something I loved. But I wasn't ready for the out there aspect or the part of being out there when you didn't fit into, I guess, a classic scientist mold. And I think that for me is what's really important, or what I like to talk about when I talk about fieldwork. Aside from the critical importance of fieldwork or the contributions that are made by actually being able to look at the rocks that we want to model or tend to model, or whatever feature we want to model, I like to really talk about, but what happens when you don't necessarily fit into a certain spectrum or you have certain issues and fieldwork is supposed to be a part of that. So I guess thinking about the accessibility or lack of accessibility sometimes is kind of what my out there is more akin to. So it wasn't necessarily the issue of camping, even though I didn't pitch a tent until I was like 18, but it's actually the accessibility aspect of it that had me out there or had me totally mystified or mustified, or honestly, being very honest with you, turned off because of like people's reaction. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. It feels like sometimes it's almost like a weeding out opportunity, like if you can't cut it doing fieldwork, then maybe this isn't the career for you, or maybe this isn't the degree for you. And we know that like the geosciences, right, notoriously underrepresented for minorities and probably the same for people with disabilities. And instead of, well, not to diminish the work that lots of people are doing to try and improve that, we seem to be comfortable with this kind of filter, right? Like, oh, you can't do field work. Well, too bad, I guess. But like from my own personal experience, like I struggled just being out there. Like it takes a toll on you. Going up steep slopes, down steep slopes for hours on end, it wears you out pretty quickly. And you think that you're fit, you think that you can do it, but then you start realizing, well, this might be a bit more than I signed up for. And it was after my first stint of like one of my classes that we had to spend 2 weeks out in the field for. I realized that my parents gave me the genetic blessing of having really limited cartilage in my knees. Because, like, after 3 days of hiking up and down those hills, my knees were like a flame, right? Like any impact was just jarring. And I felt so much pressure to keep going, like to bare my teeth and push through it because I didn't want to slow the group down, or I didn't know if it, like everyone else is getting on the in the van and going here. So what are you gonna like? It never really felt like I had the option to say, or it was okay to say, like, guys, I I can't. I just can't. So I think I subjected myself to a lot of pain that I didn't necessarily need to, and kind of still feeling the consequences of that. But yeah, I hope that the environment now is one that's more welcoming, or one that feels forgiving enough for students who are struggling to say, like, yeah, this is my limit, and that be okay.
Man, so many great points were actually raised there. And I don't even know where to start. So, audience and colleague, bear with me because it's going to sound like I'm rambling, but I have a point, I promise. But before we even go down, or before I go down on a tangent, I guess let's take a few moments for our audience members, and anyone joining us to really just kind of quantify what we mean by, or what we're referring to when we say field work as a geoscientist. Because for those not familiar, it probably just kind of sounds weird to them when we're saying in the field or field work. So, do you want to share your definition, and then I'll kind of share mine, and then continue to respond to what you were saying a little bit earlier about your field experience, and then and kind of what you're hoping or wondering about regarding now.
So a big part of what I do as, or we do as geologists, involves looking at rocks because they're literally like records of what has happened on our planet for many millions of years. And the best place to find nice exposures of rock that aren't covered by lots of vegetation or covered by lots of concrete would be out in, I guess, what Americans might call the wilderness, but out in these less developed areas. So imagine that you're far from any development, probably a place that you would go backpacking or camping, and we're looking for rocks and landforms and other features that are easy to observe. So when I was a geology student, I did lots of field work in Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, places where you could go see the rocks, describe them, observe, make your interpretation, make your observations. So when we refer to field work, we're referring to those opportunities that you have to, you know, do science on the rocks in nature in their natural setting. How is your definition different, Liaika?
I guess for once, I could say it's not that much different. I know I tend to combat you a lot. Definition quite similar. I will say though, if we had to just in plain language summarize and to just be really transparent, it is using the outdoors as a laboratory so that we could pretty much, improve or better understand what occurred before us, or what we can't necessarily see. The only thing I changed from your definition is the part where you said where we could easily see, because part of field work is not about necessarily what we see immediately in front of us. There is some uncovering, which is why there's like also some discussion about preservation and cultural rights and geopolicy, and respect of the land. So sometimes it involves us having to excavate into the ground or into the mountains, so we could see those time signatures or collect samples that we could date or bind together. And so this is where fieldwork while it provides so many benefits, it can also sometimes be a little bit exclusionary because sometimes being able to access these points, whether it's scalability, climbing, or going onto lands that, we didn't necessarily, depending on our cultural, political, or even religious upbringings, may not necessarily want to go on. And then like how we feel about some of this land. And so I guess this kind of that segues really nicely into what I kind of wanted to touch on when we were talking about fieldwork, or when you shared your field experience about going into having this experience where you, of course, enjoyed being on the road, but after the third day, not necessarily feeling physically able, but pushing through to the point of almost exertion and unrecognizable pain. And so, yeah, I definitely had that experience. And I had to add insult to injury. I had a professor who pretty much told me that's what classifies being a geologist is. And you people, and I'm talking about 15 years later, I'm still wondering what you people, or what he meant by you people. And this is a professor who's no longer in the geoscience field. But, I still every day wonder about what he means by you people and fieldwork. And that really colored me as a geologist and how I actually view fieldwork and why I do the work that I'm actually doing today, or why I think I was destined for the work that I do today. Because I, along with many other amazing geoscientists, one of the things we really talk about and think about, especially when it comes to the classroom, is how to create these spaces where students are comfortable saying, I am not okay today because of Ramadan. I may not be my best self in the field. I may not be able to go to the field, or because of, medical reasoning, without having to disclose the reason, especially if it's to somebody of an opposite gender, where they're not necessarily comfortable. They're able to say, because, without feeling like they're going to be looked on or critiqued or harshly spoken to or excluded, right? Because one of the things we talk about with geology is we talk about this equity that we would love to see and we want to build, and sometimes we forget that equity is a umbrella term for many things, and equity in the field is something that sometimes gets overlooked or swept underground, and that is just being able to feel safe and comfortable to say, I cannot make it today for whatever the reasoning being. So I was actually a little less than a month ago on a field trip where that was actually the main drive behind the field trip, to see how that works. And I don't want to put my other colleague on blast, because I don't know if he's ready to openly necessarily talk about it yet, but it was one of the most amazing field experiences ever, watching the students have autonomy to say, XYZ regarding that field work. I feel like this is me. I'm bringing my whole self present. And then there were also family members in the field. And that really resonated with me of what I hope many other practitioners of fieldwork will do going forward, because like just being able to show up in the field as your whole self and seeing those students thrive. When I tell you that that was the food I didn't know I needed, right? And just even bringing the familial aspect into it, because I became a geoscientist because I hope my mom's not listening to this episode and she doesn't get upset with me, but my love for geology is because of my dad. I became a geoscientist because of both my parents helping to fund my illustrious education goals. But my passion for the field started because I'm a daddy's girl. I mean, we were all there in the car, but I specifically, because it's all about me, did that drives with my dad on a Sunday, looking at those pumping jacks through the field of Palo Seco before we'd go for ice cream, or on my way from my grandparents' house back to our childhood home at the time, right? And it was driving through those fields and loving smelling the earth and smelling black gold and watching those pumping jacks and even stopping. Like my dad will humor me and hold the whole car captive, because I was the only one who wanted to do it, while I stood and listened to the creak of the pumping jack go back and forth and think about the mechanics of it. And so he, who was a mechanical engineer, in terms of his profession, he really got a high of explaining it. But me, I really got a high of thinking about what's below the earth that we couldn't see and how can I get my hands there. And, that beautiful field experience or love of going into the field or wanting to be outdoors and camping got tainted by a professor when I dared to tell him I couldn't make that field experience, kind of similar to what you were talking about, right? And he colored it with you people and field, and it just became this ugly thing. But that light was reignited. I say all that to say, essentially, that light was reignited last month, and it reminded me of what healthy field experiences could mean for the field. And I just really told our audience, I knew that long-winded story to tell you, I feel very much where you started, but I want to reassure you that's not where it is ending or that's not where it's going, because there are practitioners like myself who are really working to change that experience, practitioners in IAGD. I don't want to talk too much about IAGD because I'm hoping to have some of my very esteemed colleagues from there on as our guests so that we could talk to them and they could properly tell us about their organization. But essentially what they work for is diversity in geosciences, diversity in the field, and they really promote it and talk about they really take in not only in thought, but in action and practice about how to make sure we properly engage and facilitate accessibility in the field. So there are these small steps, right? I say this with a disclaimer that we're not changing overnight in the field of geology or geoscience, but there are these small steps that are coming together, or these conglomerates that are coming together to make it better, hopefully. But it's so good to think about this wholesomeness that we're trying to bring to the field and to help shape the students who are interested in this work. And as I say, students, I promise I'll shut up and let you talk after this. What's kind of fascinating to me, or what was really fascinating to me from that field trip that I went on recently, and I'll go on the third part in April, is that even if we as professors, scholars, co-leads, leaders, whatever you want to assign in terms of title, even if we aren't trying to make those field experiences comfortable, what was really admirable, Dr. Prince, was the fact that the students are so fearless. And I don't know about you, but coming from a West Indian background where you didn't really feel like, at least for me, the schools that I went to, I didn't really feel I had autonomy, to talk to like my professors or tell them certain things. Watching these students pretty much say, yes, this is who I am. This is who I'm going to be as a geoscientist. You're going to teach me and work with me. It was so refreshing because they're not afraid to hold you accountable for the good or the bad of it.
That is true. And I think you make a good point. At least in Trinidad, like growing up, your teacher said something that is law, right? But I'm glad that at least in this setting that students feel like they can make their voices heard and that they have the power to change things for the better. So coming off the back of that very memorable field experience, what kind of practical tips, you as someone who's had many field experiences, what kind of practical tips would you give to a student who maybe is coming in that doesn't have that same background to draw on?
Practical tips that I'd give to a student, and honestly to myself also, first and foremost, do not be afraid to let the field trip lead or, your professor or I guess colleague know what's going on with you. And I'm not saying like bring your whole medical history and put it in the van, but up front, let that person know your concerns so they can actually really help you work through them. Because one of the things about field work is psyching yourself out, right? And I say this as somebody who has literally stood on the ridge of a mountain and bawled her eyes out because she didn't think she was going to make it down because of the steep inclines. Whereas
Do we have video?
There are actually a couple of photographs that will be shown on the day that I do defend this dissertation. Because I literally slid, like I sat on my butt and slid across this ridge. And after I did that, one of my colleagues said, "Man, Lee, if you told me, I would have advised you to get some poles. Who knew you could get hiking poles for the fields?"
There are so many hacks, and we want to share some of those too.
So do not be afraid to be honest about where you are regarding your comfort level and your health, so that you can get these hacks. A second hack will be, you do not have to wear Colombia and Patagonia. I know every picture in magazines, including AAPG subscriptions, makes you think like that is the designated brand, but we do not have official sponsorship.
You gotta have the drip. If it in Patagonia or North Face, do we use North Face a lot? Patagonia.
I mean, I love me some North Face, and I agree. You have the drip when you have the job, right? My field gear looks a lot better now because I have a paycheck. But I will be honest for my listeners and for students. I bought my first time getting ready for field camp was such a costly mistake because of where I was advised. And over the years, I learned that I could go to Walmart and I can get some great, I forget what you call that technology. I know you know it. It's pretty much that air dry, swishy stuff.
Gore-Tex? No, that's the non-wetting one. But yeah, like there are some things that you can get at Walmart that, like, I bought some of my refill gear there and I still have them like 7 years later.
Exactly.
There are some things
beginner field stuff or like once in a blue moon field, because I think the reality of this, we need to be honest, right? It is amazing to see the rocks. It is amazing to be out there, but not everybody likes it. Not everybody's going to follow that path in their career. So honestly, if at the beginning you buy no name gear, as long as your gear protects you from the elements, rain, snow, sun, mosquitoes, as long as your gear does not cause an allergic reaction, it's breathable. So it means you can hike for whatever that particular field trip is. I think it should be encouraged. And if it's something that you're deciding like, man, this is what I'm going to be doing for life, either professionally or socially, then you can upgrade to whatever you think may be worth it. But we really need to take that pressure and that stigma off for students.
Like, listen, I was on a student stipend. I bought what I could have afforded. And what I could have afforded was what was cheapest. There was one cheap purchase, though, that I do regret. I bought a very cheap tent. It did not survive. What was it? By the second night, the wind had absolutely flattened it and I was done. So I ended up spending the rest of the trip sharing a tent with a friend who was very generous and kind. So that worked out, but maybe not the cheapest tent, but you don't have to spring for the most expensive one either, right? And look, if you find a friend, you all are willing to split the cost or share a tent, that is A-okay too.
So that's a pretty good hack, but here's 2 other hacks for that. Be upfront with the lead, because most times, whether it's a professor or a professional person hosting, they typically have like tents that they've outgrown that are still amazing quality. I've been the benefactor of that generosity many times. I mean, as recent as 2 years ago. Another good hack, though, if you are a student and you are enrolled, typically your university has some type of outdoors rec center on campus where they rent tents, or they have referrals to in-town rec centers where you can get a good tent for rental. And so the nice thing about that is that you can buy it for your first you could rent it for your first field trip. You could rent it until you save up to buy the tent that you would like to buy. But it also helps you to like learn what you need or what your needs are. Because example, and what I mean by that is I need a sleeping pad and a thin mattress under my sleeping bag. So that's another hack, right? Figuring out what you need to help with your achiness. So while you don't want to be out in the field pushing through debilitating pain like you've done, Dr. Prince, or even I have once done, you want to try to limit though, because sleeping on the ground, especially with temperature drops, that really does impact how your body performs the following days while you're out there camping, right?
Mhm.
So I think also being very real with yourself and knowing or understanding what your body needs so you can get those purchased. Like to me, that's more of a priority than trying to purchase a Columbia shirt because everybody else is wearing Columbia.
Another hack: get your hiking boots
And
3
break
to
them
4
in.
and break those bad boys in. You do
Do
not want to
not,
be
do not.
hiking extended
Unless,
hours in new hiking boots. Give yourself
yeah,
some time.
unless there's some reason like your hiking boot got split in the field or you left one side back at the campsite or at college, which I have actually seen happen to colleagues, try to avoid going hiking or standing for extended hours in brand new shoes because that means even if you survive day one, day two, day three, or however rest of time out in the field is going to be severely uncomfortable. So definitely breaking your shoes in, which brings me to another hack. The right socks are everything. We
Are
like
we
to
are we
think
talking wool?
we're talking breathable and knowing and understanding what climatic conditions you're in. Because we talk about field safety and people usually talk about like looking out for snakes and, how to cross a ridge. But socks, I have seen some cases where socks have stuck to people's feet. What's happened because of that? And I'm going to spare us the gross that gross conversation because I'm not a medical doctor and I'm also very squeamish. But just knowing what's breathable for your feet because you're extending or you're standing in extended conditions, right? Whether it's too cold, too hot in these
Yeah.
boots.
And things often break on field trips, boots included.
That is true.
Some duct tape, a roll of duct tape comes in pretty handy. And as someone who has rubbed up against a sharp rock and split my pants open on the morning of a hike, duct tape saved us all. I've seen
Duct
people duct
tape is
tape
your friend.
shoes back together. Yeah, duct tape is your friend. Cheap, cheap, but very effective hack.
While duct tape is your friend, sunscreen is also your bigger friend. As someone who did field camp in Canyon City, Colorado, and did field camp without sunscreen for half of it, and who literally, like my skin literally fried like an egg in a
I can
pan.
hear the sizzle.
You can hear the sizzle and you saw the sizzle for 10 plus years after. I'm talking about like the spots just started lightening. Sunscreen is your friend. Apply, apply, reapply, apply, reapply.
Long, light, breathable shirts help baseball caps look cool, but the floppy gardening hat or the floppy fishing hat, yeah, you get a lot more utility out of that.
Definitely protect yourself from the elements. Not only does it mean that you can probably get more out of yourself work wise because you're more comfortable, but it also means you're really protecting yourself in terms of like hydration. So you're not losing as much water. And I guess that goes to my other tip, right? Drink, drink your weight in water, even if you're not feeling thirsty, because dehydration is real, especially if you're doing field work in arid climates or hotter climates close to the equator, doing field work in the middle of the summer. If you're out there and you're not sweating and not drinking water, that's not a good sign.
Here's one something that I didn't know existed, but camping toilet paper is a thing apparently, and it's great.
I've heard
It's
about it.
such a space saver.
I've
Yeah.
heard about it. I've never used it. I have to confess, I am a wipes girl, but I will say it's not a hack, but just general knowledge and courtesy. please, whatever you take out into the field, know that it is not degradable. Do not leave it there. So, aside from it being really terrible for the environment, you do not want your colleague coming up behind you and finding your stuff.
Um,
Think about disposal on your own and how you may. But the point is, don't leave anything behind. Leave no trace.
yeah, I usually keep a trash Ziploc, for the stuff that gets a little licky that you can seal up, stash in your backpack until you get back to camp, and maybe put it into the larger trash collection there. But yeah, Ziplocs come in handy for lots of things on field trips, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was kind of fun reminiscing. I know it felt a little bit like we're freewheeling it, but it was nice talking about our field experience, how we kind of got involved, what we both respectively experienced, and what's our driving passion with doing fieldwork still. And those are some great hacks for the upcoming field camp season. Make sure that you get appropriate, comfortable clothing, protective. That's your main concern. Breaking in your boots, sunscreen. Oh yeah.
And remember, ask questions. Like I said, your team lead or your professor, the person who's leading that field trip or field experience, should usually have a lot more experience than you do. So ask questions, prepare, and make the best of it. And remember, if you don't feel safe doing something or going somewhere, it's okay to speak up. Nobody knows your limits and nobody knows your body like you do. And hopefully those concerns are listened to and addressed. We're making progress. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I think that's a great place to close off on. Consent is a thing in the field, and definitely exercise your autonomy for consent.
right. And with that, we bid you adieu.
See you next month, where we will return to our lovely structured selves. And yeah, thanks for rocking with us. I guess happy birthday, GeoTrip.
Ah, a terrible juice.